Hi, it's time to talk about the Vice President, and good news for two reasons. First of all, there's not much in this particular course that's easy. However, in terms of money for old rope, this is about as close as you're going to get. The Vice President is certainly one of the easier things we're going to look at, and it's easy for two reasons. First of all, there's only two things you need to worry about, really. That is, what does he do at time of election, and what does he do once he's there? And this is Unit 3, so right now I'm not particularly bothered about that. We're looking at this. And that means that it's fairly self-contained. There's not a huge amount of spread with the VP, except really in his relationship to Congress and a little bit to do with Exop and Cabinet. But really, the VP is by and large a self-contained unit of very, very limited knowledge. And really, this is it. He has a constitutional role, which is incredibly limited. He is the presiding officer, Speaker of the Senate, which is usually ceremonial, but occasionally becomes significant when the Senate is split 50-50. He's also next in line if the President is unable to exercise their duties, and that means takeover when the President is indisposed permanently, or acting President when the President's indisposition is merely temporary. And we can perhaps discuss why that happened there in 87, 2002, 2007. But again, these are all very, very limited and fairly self-contained and, frankly, easy. Let's look at presiding officer and Speaker of the Senate. And we can see here, eventually, that it's a largely ceremonial position. They very rarely pop up. But when the Senate is tied, this can be significant. And George Herbert Walker Bush voted 7 times. That was during the Reagan administration, of course. Bush then went on to become Bush 41, but this was when he was VP. Dick Cheney voted 8 times, including the tax cuts, and the tax cuts is one of the biggest things that Bush did on a domestic context. So that's Bush 43, of course. So that's one of the biggest things that Bush did at home, so you really need to know about that. And here's a demonstration of all of these guys voting. And excuse me, there's Cheney popping in there. There's Daddy Bush, Bush 41. And look at that, Al Gore hardly ever required to vote, largely because I think the Democrats were able to get this stuff through. So there we go. That's a voting record of the vice presidents, and you can see that really it's not vitally important, but it does occasionally pop up and become very, very important. And what we find is that really when we're dealing with the Vice President, it is all about those odd occasions when they suddenly become very powerful. And a lot of that is down to this, the unofficial role, to help the President do his job. Now, it requires there how much help, how much help does the President need? If the President needs a lot of help, then the Vice President becomes quite significant. If the if the President doesn't need the help, then obviously he doesn't need as much of an active Vice President. And then what the other unofficial role as President of the VP is just not to make too many mistakes. Now, we come back to this thing. What affects his ability to do his job? Well, obviously, if he's good, he's not going to cock up. But then if he's good, the President might find him especially useful. So if your President is inexperienced or useless, and I think you can imagine where I'm going here, then the Vice President potentially becomes very, very important. Again, the working relationship with the President becomes very important. Are they friendly with the President, or did the President just put them there for show? Again, that becomes very, very relevant in certain circumstances. Personality and ambition. Does the VP want the #1 job? And in the case of Cheney, the answer to that was categorically not. And just what kind of happens to drive things along. Events, dear boy, events, as somebody once said. Now, here are a few bits and pieces of evidence to help you support your argument. Each each president coming in will have various amounts of experience of government, experience of Washington generally, experience of Congress more specifically, and perhaps areas of specific specialization. And where the President is weak, the Vice President can step in and offer something perhaps. So it depends what the President is bringing to the table. What can the Vice President bring to the table that might complement or even complete that particular executive package. And you can have a look at that, and frankly, that's about as much evidence really as you're going to need. But I do have some more on this particular page where I look at the other stuff. We look here at the particular working relationship, the personality and ambition, and the events, dear boy, events that shaped the events of the last 4 or 5 administrations. Lots of information there. To be honest, between that slide and this slide, this is all the information you're really going to need on the VP. But without a shadow of doubt, the most important one is this. This changed everything. The relationship between Bush and Cheney tore up the rule book and redefined the role of the vice president. However, when it comes to the vice president, and the question is how influential is the VP, how important is the VP, how much power does the VP have? Well, the answer is, well, we can look at the James Garner and Dan Quayle relationship, or we can look at Dick Cheney, and the answer simply becomes, it depends. It depends on the president, it depends on the vice president, and it depends on the circumstances. And if you're wondering what the James Garner reference is all about, well, I'll tell you. You'll remember at the very start of this presentation, you saw this, and you might be wondering what that was. Well, somebody asked James Garner what he thought of the role of the vice president, and he said it's about as useful as a bucket of warm spit. At least that's what your textbook will tell you. That's not entirely what he said. He said something broadly similar, but certainly not something I'd want to commit to paper, or even a video. So the question then becomes, how important is the vice president? Is he James Garner / Dan Quayle, or is he Dick Cheney? Well, it depends. It depends on the circumstances, and it depends on the individuals involved. And I don't know what's happened to my D-pen. My presentation is quite clearly broken. I'm going to have to go back, fix that, and do please come and bring those questions to me. I look forward to answering them. Speak to you soon.